I'm going to composite my explosion into this shot just as a bit of a visual test to see how well my track is working. And I've imported this explosion, the stock footage. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag and drop this onto the top of my composition. And here it is in my composition, and it's a 2D layer. I've put it on the top so there's no 3D interaction going on between this element and my other stuff at the moment. This explosion is purely a 2D layer sitting over the top of everything. What I want to do is I want to scrub through my footage until I can just see the explosion starting and I can see the ground. And I'm just going to move this explosion footage around a little bit in my view until I can see the ground. What I'm guessing is going to happen is when I make this, this explosion footage a 3D layer in my tracked footage, I'm probably going to need to scale it to get it to the right size. If I want to scale it, what I want to do is I want to scale it from the ground so that I can place the base of the explosion on the ground and scale it up and down from there. So now that I can see the explosion and see the ground, I'm going to hit Y on my keyboard, and that will let us change where the anchor point of this layer is. The anchor point, it's a little wee circle with a couple of spikes coming out of it. Now that we've hit Y, we can click and drag that, and I want to put it in the middle of my explosion at the base of it. So this anchor point is where our layer scales from. So if I set this right before I put this into a 3D space, then when I scale it, it's going to be a lot easier. So once this pivot point or this anchor point is in the middle of my explosion at the base of it on the ground, I'm going to hit V on my keyboard. That just takes me back to my standard selection tool. And now what I want to do is I want to make this a 3D layer so it sits in the 3D space. The way that we do that is super easy. Select your explosion, and if you have a look in your composition down where the layers are, there's a couple of little wee icons. There's one that looks like a little wee cube in perspective. If you click that cube icon, or the one just in the line of that for that particular layer, that makes that layer a 3D layer. So it's now sitting in our 3D track space. So any graphics that have that little wee cube icon turned on, they become a 3D layer. Now mine's disappeared. I don't know where it is. If I scrub through my timeline a little bit, okay, now I can see it. It's in the middle of my scene. It's kind of, I guess, probably at the origin where I specified the origin was before. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lift it up a little bit just using these axes guides that are in my viewport. When I run my cursor over those little axis arrows, I can see a Y or an X or a Z. I'm going to grab the Y one and click and drag this layer up. So it's kind of sitting. It should be sitting pretty much where that path is. We defined that path as the origin of our 3D After Effects environment, so that's where our layer should appear. Now the other thing I'm going to do is I just want to change the timing of this explosion so that it happens a little bit later on. So I'm going to grab my explosion layer and just slide the whole thing to the right. This is the start and the end point of my explosion layer, so I'm just going to shift it so that it starts a little later on. And I might just move it slightly back down the path a little bit. I'm just dragging along my Z-axis there. I just want you to see this in the shot a little bit quicker. Now do be very careful when you're shifting your 3D layers. Always click and drag on those axis arrows where you can see which axis you're dragging it along. So here's my explosion now, and I can see it, and it's just starting to kick off, and it's sitting pretty much on the path. So that's all good. I'm happy with that so far. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to hide that solid because I don't want that anymore. I've just used that as a bit of visual reference. I'm going to just hide it. So that's solid. I'm just going to turn its little eye icon off. Now the other thing I want to do is obviously I want to get rid of all this black around the explosion. And this is what I was talking about before with explosive or lighting elements that are filmed on black are really easy to key into film footage. Pretty much all we need to do is select that layer, go into our switches and modes, which is this button at the bottom of the interface on the left. And when we hit that, we can change the blending mode of this particular layer. Now, if you've used Photoshop before and played with blending modes, you'll know that any graphics layered on top of each other can be blended in different ways. They can have just plain transparency, or they can be calculated on top of each other in a different way. I want to use this lighten mode, and what that basically means is it takes the colors from the explosive element and lightens the background. Because there's a lot of black, black won't do any lightening, so it basically disappears. So this is a really quick and easy way to composite fire type or lighting type effects into footage. So hopefully I should have a little explosion now that sits in my footage. Now, nobody likes small explosions, we want big explosions. So select your explosion layer and hit S for scale, and now you can click and drag on that scale value, and because we set the anchor point at the base of that explosion, it scales nicely from the bottom, so it's really easy to get it to the right size. So now I can make a really big explosion, which is far more fun. And if I hit space on my keyboard, After Effects will do a quick screen render of my sequence, and once it's done that, it'll play it back nice and smoothly. It'll take a little bit of time to do the actual preview render. I've hidden my solids as well, hidden my other solids that I was using as reference, just so this looks a little bit more convincing. So what we've done here, I mean, it's going to be a pretty quick and dirty composite. It's pretty basic, but the idea is that it shows you how you can get started with this kind of stuff. The basic techniques are there. Track something, place a layer in 3D space, and you can really start to really quickly see how you can build up compositing elements and how you can make stuff happen. Mine's nearly finished its preview render. It should look interesting once that's done. Only a couple of seconds left to go. Okay, so there's my explosion, and that's not too bad. One thing you will notice, if you made your explosion quite big, once it explodes past the sort of the line of the roof of the building, you know, it starts to look a little bit fake there because we're really seeing how kind of thin that is. What you can do, there's all sorts of tricks. Once you've got this process working, there's all sorts of tricks to improve the look of your explosions. You can use several explosions and just layer them slightly in 3D space, which gives it a bit more depth. You can play around with different transparency values and different blending modes, and you can combine different blending modes together. So there's all sorts of tricks that you can do to improve the look of your explosions once they're made. But the important thing is that looks pretty good, and it looks like it's in place, and it doesn't look completely crap, which is always a good thing.